welcome to another episode of the Freshwater Yankee podcast. As always, I'm your host, Wendell Riley, coming to you from Shreveport, Louisiana, by way of Trinidad and Tobago. And today I have a special guest here with us, someone who I've had the honor and privilege of working with for the last 2 years or so, or maybe a little bit more. It feels like longer. But somebody I have a tremendous amount of respect for in terms of her work, not only in the Louisiana community, but also nationwide. So, you can pay me to be your hype man, Miranda. But
I don't have to, apparently.
Exactly. So, but I will cut my introduction short and just introduce you. You are Miranda Restovic. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Yep. Close enough?
Good. It's good.
Okay, I will take that. And so, just so I don't butcher your title, because I know you have a couple of them, tell us again what you do and who you are.
Yep. So, who I am, I'm first and foremost a human. Which is, deeply connected to my work in the humanities. It's really about all of us humans, isn't it? So I am hailing in from New Orleans by way of Dubrovnik, Croatia, which is where I was born until I was about 10 years old. And then I landed in this magical, strange, weird place called Louisiana, which I have called home since then. And have been on this, 30 plus year journey of discovering it and all the humans that reside within Louisiana, which I will say still to this day is just fascinating. It's a fascinating place with fascinating people, including you now, Wendell, for the last 2 or so years that we've been introduced and been working together. It is a place that uniquely attracts and welcomes and nurtures unique human beings. So that's me.
Awesome. And so you are the president and executive director of the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities and also the executive director of Primetime Inc.
That's correct.
So if you would, just give us just a top-line description of what the LEH does and what Primetime is.
Yeah, so they're, really two very related enterprises. Primetime actually was born out of the work that the LEH was starting to do back in the 90s to combat intergenerational illiteracy and has now become sort of a movement across the state and nationally to really bring a humanistic approach to literacy and learning and reading and critical thinking. Back in the homes, in the classrooms. And so that's Primetime in the nutshell. But as I said, LEH was sort of the origin place of that program. And the reason for it is, I think way back when, and, surprisingly, 1991 is the year that I arrived in the United States, which is the year that Primetime was born in Louisiana. And, I would have been an ideal candidate in some ways to participate in Primetime programs. I didn't know about it then. But the LEH, I think then realized that, hey, in order for us to have thriving humanities organizations, communities, people who are engaged in their culture, in their communities, who visit libraries, who buy books, who engage in creative endeavors, we have to have a literate society. And so in that way, LEH was, I think, in preservation mode. It realized that unless we started at the beginning, we might not have audiences down the road. And so, the LEH is Louisiana's statewide affiliate to the National Endowment for the Humanities. Its charge is to really uplift the humanities in every corner of our state, and we do that through storytelling, through our magazine, through public programs, through grant making to our partner institutions that protect and preserve Louisiana heritage, like our libraries, museums, archives, historical houses, communities of little old ladies who preserve their local histories. We sort of work with the big institutions and small, and are really the only organization in the state of Louisiana tasked with that broad mission. And so it's a big mission for a state that has, I think, a lot to preserve, and a lot to continue to discover and surface for our future generations about what it means to live in a place like Louisiana, what it means to honor its history and legacy, and what position it can hold in the future, as sort of a beacon of creativity and culture and creation. And so in that way, the LEH is the little engine that could, because many people don't really know it exists. But if you go to a small town anywhere in Louisiana where there is strong cultural infrastructure, they see the LEH as their number one partner in this work, because we are, and have been for 50 years, the organization they come to for support.
Yeah. And I just want to interject here and say that I have the privilege of serving on the board of directors for the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. And I will also say that I have lived in Louisiana since 2009, and I have learned more about this state just in time that I have been on the LEH board than I had in the entire time that I've been living here, in the lead up to that board appointment. And you're absolutely right. Louisiana is a unique and wonderful place. And it is, for me, as someone who comes from the African diaspora, of all the places that I've lived in the United States, Louisiana most closely reflects the culture that I experienced growing up. And there are many tangential relationships, but there are also some direct through lines. Like Mardi Gras is essentially a mirror of Carnival, which we have. A lot of the food is very similar, because we too have a mix of heavy African and heavy European influence. I would say the biggest difference, other than, being in two separate countries, is that we also have a lot of East Indian influence. And so when I walk through, say, the French Quarter in New Orleans, I see what Port of Spain, which is the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, used to look like when I was growing up. And so it's a very, very strange thing to come to Louisiana from other parts of the U.S., and then when you really get down into places like New Orleans and smaller communities, and you see how rich and deep these roots run, it is very eye-opening, and it's very inspiring as well.
Yeah. I hail from essentially what's considered Eastern Europe, although we don't really see ourselves as Eastern Europe. We see ourselves as sort of a Mediterranean community on the coast of Croatia. But I feel the same way. I see a lot of what has made Louisiana feel like home to me for so long is, this is the only place in the United States that I've seen that people stay or come back to in a way that you don't see in other states. I still have friends from high school that live in the same homes and are caring for their elder parents, and maybe even work in the same places where their parents work. So it's this sort of similar intergenerational connections and living that I experienced as a child in Croatia. In Croatia, when you had a child and they grew up and they started their own family, you just built another, you added to your house, and that's where they lived. They didn't move to another place. And so in that way, it feels so stable. It feels like the roots run deep. And I think that in that, it makes it feel like home to me, because I know what that feels like. I love walking down the street and being like, that's so-and-so's grandma's house. And that grandma's still there. Like, she didn't go anywhere,
Yeah. Yeah, and very, very similar in Trinidad and Tobago as well. So much so that there are homes that are built with the ground floor open, so that when you get married, you and your wife or you and your husband can move in, and then you basically build walls around it, and that becomes another living abode. I'd never even really considered that, but I mean that's sort of the point of these conversations is if you think of it from a cultural perspective and a language perspective, things feel different, right? I would say Croatia is probably very different from Trinidad and Tobago in a lot of ways, right? And certainly different from Louisiana. But there are just these touch points that I keep being reminded of when I navigate life in Louisiana, and they do make me feel more at home, even though I'm living thousands and thousands of miles away from where I grew up. So tell me a little bit about young Miranda coming to the U.S. What was that like for you? And let's talk a little bit about your journey in the U.S. growing up.
And my mom is visiting with me, and we were just talking a little bit about that timeline. And, I mean, I loved my childhood. I felt like I was the queen of the world in a way. I mean, I grew up in this beautiful medieval looking castle-like city that was my playground. I knew every corner of it. I knew everyone. I knew everyone's business. I was one of those kids that was always on the streets. It was really hard to bring me back home, even to eat. My grandma had to chase me down to either the beach or wherever I was, and actually brought me food in little pots before Tupperware was available to feed me, because I was just out. I just loved being out. I felt like the whole city was mine. And, whenever I go back, it still takes my breath away. It is the most magical, beautiful place, my hometown. I mean, there is no wonder it's called the Pearl of the Adriatic. It really is. If you haven't been, Wendell, I urge you. I urge you to go.
List. Absolutely.
I mean, no wonder that Game of Thrones picked it as King's Landing. Like, it is beautiful.
Yeah,
it's magical.
Yeah.
So I was a very, sort of rambunctious and carefree and self-assured kid. And, I think that's definitely because my mother just instilled that in me. She just, she said whenever she and I would walk and go to a party, if her friends saw me with her, they would, their eyes would just glaze over and say, "Oh my God, here she comes with that daughter of hers. All she's going to talk about is her and how amazing she is." So my mom definitely instilled that like sense of I'm special. But that it seems to me in my memory, and I know that our memories can play tricks on us sometimes. And memory is important, but in my memory, it just felt like all of that changed overnight. Like one day, I just remember I was at the tiny little airport with my sister. My grandparents were crying. My mom was quiet. She never was. And I just knew my sister and I were going to visit our dad in America. And I remember being super excited because I thought, I'm going to America. Like, this is awesome. But I also knew deep down, like, something was shifting. Like, something was about to change. This was not just a normal thing. And, that was August, which was end of summer, which is also atypical because school was going to be starting in September. Yeah. And so I didn't fully at the time understand. I convinced myself that it was an exciting thing. But pretty soon after I landed in New Orleans, I landed directly in New Orleans. It wasn't a direct flight, but like when I got out of an airport, it was in New Orleans.
Right.
And I just, first of all, I thought, why are they heating the outside? Like, you walk in and this wall of heat just hit me, and I was so confused. But the next month, my hometown was under siege. And, I just remember seeing on the news, and then it hit me. Like, I remember then hitting me, oh, this is what's happening. Yeah. And I might not be able to go back. That was one of those moments in your life that is so, it just sends you in such a different direction than anything you thought was going to be your reality. And this is where like that, I think that immigrant spirit that people talk about comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just kick into survival mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you kick in a new, and at age 11, like it was so primal for me. You know, it was like, okay, this is my new reality. Okay, I got to learn a language. I got to make new friends. I got to figure out how to navigate this new world. I think it definitely changed me from that sort of carefree, I own the world little girl that I was into a much more cautious and maybe even serious person.
Yeah.
And, you know, it sort of set the stage, I think, for what I do now and how I approach my work now to be a lot more methodical, a lot more strategic as a decision maker, and a lot more attuned to signs. You know,
Right.
I really felt like I didn't see the signs as a kid. I was protected from the signs that like my country was going to be in war.
Yeah.
And that definitely changed after that. Like now I'm constantly reading signs. Like I'm constantly, you know, I'm thinking, well, you know, from our work at LEH, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
like, what do we need to do now? But what could possibly be on the horizon a year or two from now that we either need to prepare for or take advantage so that we can do more good? And I think that started when I
Yeah.
was 11.
Well, you know, you said you felt like you changed, right, overnight. But I think maybe it was more of just unlocking different parts of you that you may not have even needed, you know, when you were a kid. Um, I often talk about the idea of thinking two steps ahead in my work. Like I'm always troubleshooting, well, what's going to happen? So if we make this decision today, what's the reaction going to be tomorrow? And then how do we deal with that 2 days from now, and so on and so forth. And I do think that comes from being immersed in a new environment and having to figure stuff out in a way that you hadn't before, but also in a way there's some self-preservation there, but there's also that drive to want to thrive in an environment that you're in, right? You're not just here to just kick back and like not, I mean, because you know, went from sort of like parading around being cockety walk back home, right? So you didn't leave that behind, right? You just had to figure out a way to adapt to your new environment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably a better way to describe it. I mean, you know, it's still me, right?
Yeah.
I just had this thing happen where
Yeah.
to me, when I think of it, you know, even the language part, you know, that again, probably why I love what I do so much and what I love primetime so
Yeah.
much as a way to really like unlock the magic of words and stories. And we talk about in primetime, you know, people always say, well, how do you know, primetime is designed for vulnerable families, like economically or educationally. So there are many times where parents are in a program who are themselves functionally illiterate, right?
Yeah.
They go through life figuring out how to navigate, but they are not literate. And so in a primetime setting, what we're doing is using the spoken word, right? Like the oral storytelling tradition, which has been around since mankind started telling stories around a fire, to transmit information and then to still tap into the humanness of that person so they can respond to the story and connect with the story and reflect on the story. So I do think that for me, you know, arriving in this place at age 11 without being able to communicate in the language that was here
Yeah.
was also one of those, you know, it forced me, as you say, to quickly unlock a different part of me,
Yeah.
because not only did I have to figure out in the 6-month span that I didn't know how to actually communicate what I needed and how I needed it
Right.
to the people around me, but I also then tasked myself with, in 6 months, to learning the language and being able to communicate. And, I think that's another part of, and I don't know if you, in your experience, feel this way too, but that's another driver for me. And I think maybe it's foolishness, or maybe it's courage, or maybe it's risk taking. I have a very low tolerance for failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I and at the age that I'm in, and as long as I've been doing this, I've been trying to be kinder to myself about, just saying, like, sometimes you can't win. Sometimes you can't
Right.
fix something. Sometimes you can't get the result that you want in the time frame that you want it, even if it's the right thing. And that's part of it. Like, I'm driven by, like, what is the right thing? And
Mm-hmm.
couldn't we just do it right away? It would be
Yeah.
amazing,
Yeah. Yeah.
But that sort of drive to not fail is also a part of, like, my starting point here was failure was not an option.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
must learn the language if you want to succeed. You must, make new friends if you want to be a normal human being,
Yep.
a normal teenager. And that, I'm trying to reconcile some of that now, 30 years later, to be like,
Yeah.
you can ease up, Miranda. It's okay. Like,
Well, so for me, I always approach life in America, and I've told my wife this, I think in the last couple of weeks, that I live knowing that this is not my country. This is not my home turf. Nothing is promised to me. And so the stakes have always felt a little bit higher for me in every life decision that I've made. And so I have steeled myself to that, right? And I think it makes for more focus. It makes for more thoughtful decision making. But the downside of that is that I can be extremely hard on myself, and it's much harder for me to, shrug mistakes off. I try to learn from them, absolutely, and I welcome mistakes. Like I've learned as I have grown older to embrace failure in a way that is productive. So if I fail at something, then my immediate goal is to try to deconstruct it and learn from it and do better next time. That being said, there is always that 11:30 p.m. thing where I think about something that happened like 15 years ago, and I'm like, man, I should be able to let this go by now. But it is. I think that comes from just having that drive of being, or for me anyway, just feeling like I am always on someone else's turf. This is not my. I could spend all my life working here, contributing here, doing, everything by the books. And there is still a reality where this country says, "Hey, you need to leave, and you don't get to come back." Right? In Trinidad, there's no path where I would see that happening if I was still there. Right? But here, I absolutely feel that every single day, and not in a nefarious way. But I think it's more of a respect for the fact that, hey, like me being here in many ways is a privilege. And so I try to navigate my life here with that context in mind.
I haven't felt that way.
Yeah.
I think I feel like that little 11-year-old girl, like, just immediately said, okay, this is me, and
Right.
this is where I am, and so this is where I belong for now.
Yeah.
And, I know that I wasn't born here.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 30 years, I have not felt like I don't belong here. I've not
Right.
felt like it's in question. I have, dedicated so much of my time to sort of planting roots and
Mm-hmm.
giving back and being in service and raising my kids here and, uplifting the place that I call home. And sometimes I actually feel guilty that I've done that here and I didn't go back and do it for the place where I was born.
Yes.
And I think the older I get, that guilt gets louder. And so in some ways, I feel like I have overgiven.
Right.
I've overcompensated.
Yeah.
Because I'm grateful. I think when I go back home and my peers who did not get to come to America when the war started,
Mm-hmm.
they still have scars that I didn't experience. I experienced a different kind of scar.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
their faces are aged. They have lines of stress from living through a war as teenagers. Like you can see a generation that
Mm-hmm.
lived through a war.
Yeah.
And I don't have those same lines on my face. I don't have those same scars. And, there is, so in that way, like, I'm so grateful that I was given this gift.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the older I get, I sort of question, how long was this gift supposed to be mine? And but things get complicated when you have kids. I think that's the part that
Yeah, you start thinking about some really really profound stuff when you have kids.
yeah.
The way I quantify it is this. So I'm fairly well known in my community here in Shreveport for work that I've done, but when I go back home, outside of like my friends and family, I'm fairly anonymous, right? So it's this weird relationship where I'm sort of a big deal here, right? And I say that self-deprecatingly, but when I go home, I'm just another person, right? And it's great. I enjoy that, but it does remind me of that kind of guilt about, man, I'm doing all of this work for another community. And I remember like my grandmother said that about my grandfather once, and was she was Chinese, and she said, he's lighting lanterns in other people's houses, but he's not lighting it here, right? And it just meant he was just like out in the community. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but he was just that kind of guy that he would go out and everybody loved him, and he would walk in the village and all that good stuff. But that phrase always stuck with me, and the older I get, the more I think about that, because I'm like, man, I have to figure out a way to reach back into Trinidad and help, because I make such a fuss about trying to reach underserved communities here in Shreveport, and an underserved community needs help no matter where it is, right? And so helping in Shreveport is great, but then I'm like, man, what about Trinidad? What about Tobago?
Yeah,
And so
it is. I mean, it is so hard in the work that I do. First of all, it's
yeah,
really hard to explain to people back home what it is that I do because,
oh, yeah, same.
there's no like NGOs there that do the kind, it's all essentially government agencies who do
Mhm.
similar things.
Yeah,
And so most of the time, I don't even talk about what I do when I go back home.
yeah,
I'm like you, fairly anonymous. And then it's really hard when I go and visit museums or
yeah,
libraries, and I'm like, oh man, if they would just let me run with
right.
this, I could turn this into
Yeah,
something amazing,
yeah, 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 yeah.
But it's like, just that's not your job. Like,
Right, right. Yeah, you're on vacation, right?
right. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, can I go talk to the director? Can I give him a few tips? Like, I've even found myself like making appointments with mayors of towns to be like, look, if you only did these three things, you'd be amazing. But then I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah, yeah. So why did you decide to go into the humanities? So you
Yeah.
went into teaching?
Yeah. I mean, I think the humanities kind of found me, you
Yeah.
know. I didn't, like you said, first of all, when I was growing up, I dreamed of being, an archaeologist, a ballerina, or an ambassador back to Croatia. Like I
Right.
did not even know this world existed. I didn't know an organization like the LEH even existed. Um, and it was just not, it's not like we grow up in school being like, I want to be a director of an NGO. Um, although, maybe that's going to change. After this podcast, everybody's going to be like, we want to be directors of
Yeah.
NGOs. Um, but, I did, after college, I came back home by New Orleans, because I
Yeah.
went up north to undergrad. And I came back home, and I always loved kids. I babysat, all through high school. That's how I earned my money.
Yeah.
And I just loved education spaces. They were the safe spaces for me. When I got here, I spent all my time at my school, at my new school. Like I just loved being in those. I love being in those libraries. I love playing team sports and getting into those, you know, uh, matching outfits. Like I just loved everything about school environment here in the
Yeah.
U.S.
Hmm.
And I did end up in a really privileged school environment.
Sure.
I get that, but
Yeah.
it just felt it was my safe space. And so when I got back, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I thought I love school and I love young people and I love this idea of like education being the the key to freedom, like the key to your future. And so I started teaching, and that was about the same time I had my first son, my oldest son, who's right now 21, and I'm agonizing over launching him into the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a beautiful young man, but he was also like another really pivotal moment for me. Like when I became a mom, and I was young, I was 24, I was teaching, and I realized that in order for me to do teaching the way that I thought it needed to be done, I had nothing left in the tank for when I got home to be with my son. I literally was just exhausted.
Yeah.
And it's because, I really wanted to connect with every kid. I really wanted to understand them, understand their home environments, like figure out how to motivate them. And it was exhausting. And also I realized that maybe it wasn't my calling. And so, that summer that Katrina also hit right in the middle of that and disrupted all of the education in New
Yeah.
Orleans.
Right.
That added another stress layer. And then when we all got back into the city and I finished another year of teaching, by this time my son was 2. I just said, I can't do this. This is too much. And a friend of mine actually said, well, this program that I know Primetime is hiring, you should look at it. It's like teaching and education, but not classrooms. And I literally went on the website, I saw it, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I would love to do this. People pay you to do this? And I remember going for an interview, and I was hired on the spot. Like I remember that day clear as day. I remember what my hiring supervisor was wearing. I still remind her of that. Like she was wearing this beautiful linen top. She looked so chic, and I was like, I want to be that. And then like a week later, I started at LEH, and I have not left. I almost think of it as Hansel and Gretel. Like there was enough crumbs put before my path, and I followed them, know.
Yeah.
And I think that's also how I ended up staying for so long at the LEH. Next year will be 20 years. It's been a really interesting exercise, and like I do periodically, when I meditate, I sort of ask myself, is this still the thing that you want to be doing? Because people tell me it's fairly rare for people to stay in a job as long as I have.
Yeah.
And, I feel like the answer up until this point has been yes. And I think it's because, there's so much good that we do, but there's so much more good that can be done with just the humanities, which is I know, kind of crazy. Like most people don't even know what the humanities are, but there's so much good that can be done with the
Yeah,
humanities.
yeah. It is work that requires fastidiousness, and work that requires us to just be tireless in what we do. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about drive and ambition because you are, and this is just me saying this. You strike me as someone who is um, very open and warm and caring, but as you described, there's an internal drive in you, and there is a level of seriousness, and um, there is a very strategic way that you approach the world, right? And so you talked a little bit about that coming from, those pivotal years in your development. But how much of your Croatian heritage do you draw upon in the way you live and work today?
Um, I think that my Croatian heritage is like the salve in my life. I think my experiences, as I said before, is sort of what has made me into this human that I am today.
Mm-hmm.
But when in moments of extreme stress or even fear or concern or just exhaustion from the tasks, right? It is that sense of home, of where I began, recharges my batteries. And that may be just me putting on the music of my childhood on and cooking
Mm-hmm.
food that brings me comfort, like just basically reenacting what my grandmother would have been doing in the kitchen. Whether it's, calling my mom or my sister and just speaking the language.
Yeah.
Whether it's more recently, I've started like painting again, and I'll pull up photos of like um, the environment that I grew up in, and I'll just like try to recreate it in my own hand.
Mm-hmm.
That's for me like getting back to center.
Yeah.
It's the recharging of the battery that then allows me to then get up again and,
Yeah.
you know, be the courageous person that I think is required to be to navigate
Yeah.
the world and to do the work that we do. Because it takes courage. I think it takes courage to do the work that we do.
It's interesting because you talked about the reconnecting with home to recenter yourself. Part of what I do is I've moved so many times in the US because I've lived in multiple states, and I was a student in two different states, which meant I was broke in both in two different states, and moved from like one crappy apartment to another. And so I always describe it as sort of like having a turtle shell because I have um physical artifacts that I have brought with me, and they mean so much to me. And so I collect things. It's kind of my way of just providing comfort and context for just navigating life. But also, um, my mom always says, it's like you have such a good memory about things that happen, but in a way, memories are all I have, right? Because like they help me reconnect with home, and that sort of leads into this whole other thing where the Trinidad I remember is very different from the Trinidad that exists now. So when I go home, there's a little bit of it feels like a bit of a disconnect. And I know you and I touched on this just in a prior conversation about the idea of as we get older and sort of not feeling, I mean, for me, I don't feel like I belong to the Trinidad of today. and I don't feel like I belong to the United States. And I belong in many ways. Like, that sounds a little morose and slightly melodramatic, but there is a slight feeling of disconnection with both. And that, as I get older, is something that I reckon with more and more, especially as family back home, they get older. There's guilt there, when I'm not there with my family, and my friends, and they have their lives and they're growing and changing and evolving and thriving, and I am doing the same thing but on a separate path. And so when we reconnect and we overlap, it's just not the same, And so that is interesting to say the least. And I don't know if you have any thoughts and experiences with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most sort of physical and visible way that I experience that every summer when I go home to spend some time there is language. So it's a reminder, and it used to really upset me. Is that my English is, I think, fairly sophisticated adult.
Yeah.
I have a command of the language. My Croatian is stunted. Like, I left when I was 11.
Right.
And I can speak it fluently and I can survive and communicate, but can I have deep intellectual conversations without stumbling over my words and maybe leaning into my English to try to explain what I actually mean? And that is always a reminder that, like, I live these parallel lives, and I am constantly trying to reconnect with the life that was interrupted there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to, like, fill out 16, 20, 30 years of not actually being there. And so the way that has actually manifested more recently is the minute I land and I have conversations, I start to listen for the latest lingo that everyone seems to be using. And then, like, I'm just going to lean into that, right? Like, because there's always these, like, it's just like here how kids are like 6 and 7 and
right.
bruh and whatever, right? So when I go there, there's, it changes, right? Like, people pick up slang and things. And so I'm so attuned to language to try to figure out, okay, what did I miss this year?
Right.
What is in right now? And let me try to, like a chameleon, just like assimilate to this new way of communicating. But yeah, I think, and the older I get too, I feel like, in my, the people that were my anchors in my home country, right? Like my grandmother, my grandfather, my last living grandfather just passed away this past year. Like, they're all gone. And so they were, in a way, my anchor. Like, I used to say, I'm going home to visit my grandparents. And now I can't say that anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's a real void that I feel about, well, what is the purpose of me going back if it's not for my grandparent? Like, I have had to reinvent the reasons I still feel compelled to go back. And there are definitely dreams that I have where I'm like this giant woman that's just like straddling 2 continents. And I can't decide which leg to lift and put both feet where. And that's just been a recurring dream, and I think that's just like my internal struggle of like trying to answer the question of what is home? Where is home?
That literally was gonna be my next question. Where is home, right? Because I cannot answer that question anymore. And there's a part of me that is always going to be filled with national pride, and this is a place that I grew up. I stayed for much longer than you did. I was I think around 21 when I left. And so for me, my Trinidadian identity is very, very like strong and ingrained in me. But there's a point where I realized, well, I've spent more time in this country than I did back home. And you know, I spent a lot of time there, but like you, I was a child when I was back home. So my view of Trinidad was from a child's perspective. I was nowhere near being fully formed. I went through the gauntlet of like becoming like a person here in the United States. And so it's really hard for me to ignore that, right? But I don't ever want to be like, well, I'm an American, or because I'm not. Like I'm a Trinidad, I'm a Trini through and through. Um, but there's sort of a growing dissonance there because again, every day that I wake up in the US is there's one more day that I'm here versus back home, and I do have the same thing when I go home. What I do is I defiantly use slang from from like 35 years ago. Like I use the slang that I left with, and I still use it to this day.
Nice.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how nice that is because people are like, "What?" You know,
What did
because
you say?
exactly right. Because it's literally like, dude, that was like from the 90s. Um,
There's a humanities project there, by the
I,
way.
I
Like,
feel, I feel like it. I feel like it. But it's tough, and I think a lot of people who move, even if you're moving from one side of this country to another side of the country, you always have to deal with that because you leave things behind, and it's like you described it. There are these parallel tracks that you're on, and you can go back and visit. But even if we moved back home, like if you moved back to Croatia, and if I moved back to Trinidad, I would interact with my home country in a very different way than I did when I left. And I do now. Like when I go home, I need AC in the room.
oh my God, it's terrible. It's terrible.
I
Like
get
America has done a number on me. Like
I mean, like I feel like I've gotten soft. Like I like AC, and these we live in these hermetically sealed homes where we don't have to reckon. Like if we want to shut the outside world out, we can, right? We don't have
yeah.
to open doors and windows. We like back home, you open the windows every day to let the breeze flow through because up here you don't want that. You don't want the breeze coming through in the
Oh,
middle of summer in Louisiana, right?
ew. You also don't want what might come in with that breeze.
Exactly, exactly. Um, so it is it's a very strange thing. And it does give me more pause than I thought it would, as I get older.
Yeah. I I mean, I hate to say like well, my mom's been talking a lot about like what she wants when she's no longer with us, like where she wants to be buried and all this
Hmm.
stuff. And so I think that, you know, this the other curse of sort of thinking far in advance is, thinking about, you know, the ultimate test of what home is where do you want to be buried? Um, and next to whom? And
Yeah.
so who will have access to come visit you?
Hmm.
Um, and I've just struggled. I've struggled so much. Even having conversations with my mom about that, and then thinking about that for myself because my husband is American, my kids
Hmm.
consider themselves Americans,
Yeah.
and it's so I've decided right now it's going to be half and half. Like half my ashes are going to be there and half are going to be here. Again, just like straddling two worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
That might change. I don't know. I've always sort of resolutely thought at the end of their lives, everyone's going to want to go home, wherever the home is. Like, and so I always thought, well, it's time to die. I'll just go home.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but now, as we talk, like that notion of home is so much more complicated when you've planted roots somewhere else for so long, and the next generations that you are nurturing into the
Yeah.
world don't have the same connections to the home that you had
Right.
when you were little. So I think the question of like what is home is still open.
Yeah.
Um,
and I think, unfortunately, or fortunately, it always will be for people like us, and it will always continue to evolve. I too am at the point where I'm like, well, take some of my ashes, keep them up here, and then take the other half, and then take them back to Trinidad. But then I'm like, man, if I'm a ghost, what does that mean for my eternal? Like, am I gonna be just like stuck, in two worlds? Because I watch too many horror movies, of course. So we're getting really close to wrapping up, and I really, really appreciate your time, and I hope we can do this again and maybe talk about some other stuff because I feel like there are lots of different topics that we could cover.
Yeah.
But I always ask guests this at the end. If you had to have a conversation with 10-year-old Miranda instead of 11-year-old Miranda, what are some of the things you think you would tell her?
I would have told her to write letters and actually send them, to keep connections that were important intact.
Yeah.
I would have told her to keep a journal. You said people from your home always say how you have, maybe your mom, that you have this amazing memory and you remember things. I actually really struggle with the idea of memory. I think because of the survival instinct, I sort of have only remembered certain things, and I've let go of some details where I can't access them. And so when now I find like little old journals that I wrote, which I was never consistent enough, but I just love diving in because it sort of resurfaces some part of my memory that, maybe has been buried. So I think, I would encourage my young person, especially at age 10, right before this big thing happened to me, is write letters and send them. I still find letters that I wrote to my friends that I never sent.
Yeah.
And those are the same people now that when I go back, I'm always trying to reconnect on a deeper level with, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Because we just lived such different lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, to like use words, write things down, journal, to really, to have an archive, a record of the memories from the past. Because those are so important now. Like, I feel like the older I get, the more I'm just constantly racking my brain for memories.
Yeah. And again, I'm sure this is an unconscious thing, but that's maybe also why, or it overlaps with why you work so tirelessly in the humanities because of that, the preservation aspect of culture and keeping lineages alive and keeping through lines between generations alive. It's a big deal, and you don't often think about it if you are in the place that you've always been. I think when you have to leave a place, that becomes really, really important, and it becomes more important the older you get. So yeah. Well, listen, Miranda, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I hope you had fun being on this.
Oh, it was so fun.
All right. Awesome.
I love talking to you.
Yeah, same. And, I think, I think the work that you do is outstanding. Do you want to give a plug to the LEH or any of your projects or anything like that? And obviously we'll put any links in the show notes to things that you want to promote.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one plug I would give is for folks to check out 64 Parishes magazine and 64parishes.org. I think that is the best way to really get insight into what we care about at the LEH, and how we present Louisiana to our own people, to the nation, and to the world. Just how deep and interesting and complicated and inspiring this place is.
So again, thank you so much, Miranda. And thank you all for listening today. Please like and subscribe and all that other good stuff. And we will see you next time on Freshwater Yankee. Freshwater Yankee was produced by David McMillan and Lauren Leon McMillan. Our associate producer is Jesse Stevenson Riley. Music was provided by Peter Sandy of Home Base Productions, and I am your host, Wendell Riley.